Hello everybody and welcome to another On the Workbench session. Got one more of these Gaslands vehicles here. Now this one has a whole bunch more in the way of suspension, as you can see. So that maybe leads to a little more rust and dust. We'll see when we get there. We'll mess around with that. We have our secret weapon paints. See, we got some big old tires on this, so we have our tire black like so. And we've got a little trio of rust colors here. We have old rust, red rust, and orange rust. There's also a yellow rust too. We'll just go with those three. That's good enough. We'll throw in a couple of contrast paints here too. And then we've also got ourselves some pro acryls here, like so. We're going to give this sort of a purple type of a color here. I don't know how light or dark that's going to be. That's one of those things we figure out as we go. It's a color that hasn't been done on the other 6 vehicles. So if you're wondering why, that's why. We've got the usual couple of liner paints right here. I think we'll just stick with those two. Probably won't really need I don't think we're going to need this sepia liner here. But what we'll do is I got the palette in a little different spot here. So I'm just gonna move Mr. Camera here a little bit there, because it seemed like it interfered a little bit less in that area. It's one of the advantages of using this. I can move that palette camera around. So what we'll do is we'll throw these paints out here on the palette. I'm going to get to our initial shading and initial shaded base coat and glazing, just like we've done on the powder blue one and on our, let's see, what was the next one we did? That darker blue one. So we'll be right back with that in just a second. So let's get into this again. And we're going to start off, we'll start off with some purple here. Now there's just water in that container that you see over there. And this is the transparent purple. Throw a little bit of the dark purple in there. And let's just do a little bit of this, almost more like a contrast paint style glaze, because this is not, as you can see, it's not going to cover that 100%. That's what we're hoping for. It's just going to leave behind maybe some darks and lights here. That's the other reason why I've talked about with the contrast paints. There's other things that can function as contrast paint for much less cost, I would say. Well, definitely much less cost. There's no doubt about that, because the pro acryls cost a whole bunch less than your contrast paints. They also last a whole bunch longer. There's no doubt about that either. You can use water to thin them down. There's no doubt about that. So just in many ways, to me, there's just other options for the contrast. I could have used the shyish purple here too, if I wanted to. But as you can see, see how that's leaving some lights and darks behind. And the interesting thing is that it, sort of like the Reaper clears, it doesn't leave behind the whole watermarks and that sort of thing, the big blobs. It doesn't really do that. So to me, there's a lot of pluses involved with these. Now I could also, if this was mine, I would really be tempted to go with sort of a metallic type thing, either mix the metal medium in with this, or, oh gosh, what is it? Green Stuff World has the candy inks, right? Those are something I'm going to eventually give a try. It's going to have to be something of my own, because, like I've told you a few times, I don't get to do things like metallic paints because all the stuff that I do that's for commission like this, well, you have to do what people ask for, and that generally means matching all this previous stuff you've done, which means no metallics because they didn't ask for metallics ever. So this again strikes back to that whole point of if you're going to do this for a living, all of a sudden you don't necessarily, that's not all the time where you're saying you're told it has to be like this. It's not all the time. Usually when you're doing stuff for companies, that's where so many times it has to look exactly like this cover art or whatever, or this concept art. So something to factor in. I get questions all the time from people that wanna, they're thinking about, they want to maybe do this as possibly for a living, and it's an awful lot of things you got to consider, and that is certainly one of them. Now here, just working with the purple, trying to make sure, see, by just stopping at certain points, I don't get the overflow. So we're trying to be somewhat more judicious with this application. You've seen on, I think on the one that was more of a bluish, that powder blue didn't really matter. We just kind of attacked it and put paint all over the place. It wasn't a big deal. But here, this I want to see what happens with this transparent purple and see exactly what it does. See just how much light contrast paint it can be. Again, I'm going to take a little bit of the dark purple, throw that in there. Gives it a touch of blue. Now, then we have to decide how are we going to best attack this, and I'm going to go this away here. Leave that center part alone, because what I want to do is have it be fooling around as little as possible, because I got a big area here to cover, and I'm trying to lessen that footprint. So I'm going to leave a little bit of a blob over there while I take care of this part, and then we're going to go over here and we're going to pull this along, and then I can go back into here, add some more, do some more here. And now, yeah, let's get a little more here, and then we'll finish off this. That I'm not going to mess with that for a while. I let this purple stuff dry here, because if I go in there now, that could yield me some watermarks. Playing around with that, it's so close to this other paint that's kind of started to dry. So that's definitely something I'll avoid. Here we'll, like so. Got to finish off this element here. And all the stuff that's underneath here, well, you can't really see what's going on. So we're just gonna jam that brush in there. There's gonna be an awful lot of dust and mud and everything else under there anyways, so not something to worry about. I think this is about the last bit of purple there that needs to happen. So you can see it's almost, yeah, got a little bit of almost an iridescent look to it. That's nifty. Now let's hit some of the under carriage here. We got brown liner, blue liner. We're going to emphasize more of the brown liner here. And because, remember, we were talking about how we were trying to find areas to save time and cost here. Things like this down here. Now, if I just make it darker with a little bit of lighter accents, but focus mostly on, say, dust, where the dust basically settles in the crevices and it gets actually, it looks lighter in what would normally be the shadow areas. And I think at that point, what we'll do is and I know I've talked about the whole weathering powder with the rubbing alcohol, so we'll do that. That'll get the stuff to settle down. That'll be sort of the first layer. There'll be subsequent layers where we also do a more traditional sort of dry application. But that'll be our starting point when it comes to things like the dust on the undercarriage there. To me, that sounds like a good plan. Where, again, blue and brown liner, we just want to get this dark down in here. Just looking to get that wheel well dark. And the shocks. I think that takes care of that side. And while I'm here, hit the other side. I think that's mostly on screen for you. And keep in mind when you have the option for doing the chipping, the weathering, the dust, all of a sudden you don't have to have things be completely perfect. Let's continue. Now the front wheel wells, we'll do those too. Because see how that's an interesting finish on there. I really do. It's got a little bit of a reddishness to it, and that is the transparent purple. The dark purple most definitely is towards the bluish side. I think the next place you're going to see those is possibly on the, well, Ossiarchs, I think is what they're called there, and maybe on the, oh gosh, the, what are those guys called? The Cipher Lords. Yes, that's it. The Cipher Lords for the Warcry thing. I'm going to try and get some of that purple in there. I think it's a fun, I love my really bluish purples. Those are just so nifty. So let that tire stay dark. It's a mix of the tire black and the blue liner. It's got a little more of the blue liner in there. That is a big old tire on there. Again, we're going to be letting the dust do a lot of the talking on the tires as we did on the other two. And we've got the makeup sponges here as always. We can do a touch of that. So let's go into this last wheel well over here. I've been really trying to think about that color scheme for those Cipher Lords. I definitely wanted to have some golds in there. Now, just for the heck of it, I may try and do some of my Egyptian themed basing for them. Kind of for old time's sake, or maybe I'll reprise the Demon Marble. I don't know quite yet. That's yet to be determined. So just as always, we're trying to set the stage for things as early as possible. Here we go. This is the last tire right here. Okay. Let's go right down into the hubcap with that. What the heck? We're going to be painting some lighter metals too over the rest of this. take some of that away. Just going to set that down for a second. Gotta let those tires dry for just a little bit. Alright. Now I'm going to take some of the blue liner, brown liner. We're going to find ourselves some metals here. I'm going to leave that stuff alone because I think there's still some things dry in there. But we are going to go up in here. And, this quartz is clearly not going to be blue or whatever. I forget what we did on some of the ones. Probably changed it from one to the next. But this is all about trying to make some different grays here. That's why some of it's got a little more blue liner. Some of it's got more brown liner. And I haven't really quite figured out exactly what that is supposed to be right there. That little, I don't know if that's some kind of a circuit box or a fuse, that there's cords running into it, cables running into it, so maybe that's what it is. And those, wasn't really sure what those were. I think on one I made them more like red canisters. So, as I said before, here I got more of the blue liner than the brown liner. This is almost straight up blue liner right here. And I'm probably not even going to try and wipe away some of the color. Just going to probably leave it in place. And we can go back in. I was thinking of actually using some of the same faded ultramarine that we'll be using to potentially lighten some of the purples, depending on how that goes. I sort of like what's already there. So that was a test I wanted to see. Could I actually create a base purple here, just again almost in a contrast paint style fashion, that I could just sort of tack on some more some lighter areas on, instead of having to go in and essentially repaint most of it. That remains to be seen, but for sure you can see how that has settled down into the crevices there. Something to consider. That's all. Just something to think about. If it doesn't work, I can just paint it the traditional way. No fuss, no big deal. Now we're going to move down towards the windshield here. Once again, that variation sometimes. It's almost straight up blue liner. This is mostly blue liner right here. Yeah, actually, I might leave that lighter right there. That could be interesting. You never quite know. Actually, maybe I'll just leave all that lighter. Maybe not. Sometimes you just have to kind of go with the flow of the miniature. Sometimes it will direct you along the way. There's other times it's going to try and hide from you, and you're going to have to figure that out which way it goes on your own. But as long as you got, this is another reason for the big old craft brushes like this. Because this way I'm just working in these larger zones like this. Not worried about the little stuff. I think people just I guess there is a temptation to get sort of sucked into all the little details straight away. And then you find yourself, you start to get out over your skis, and then you crash down the hill, and then that's no fun. So we're trying to avoid the crashes here, which is ironic given the subject matter. Now let's just do this window over here. I've got the tire black / blue liner mix. Just put that right down into the window area there. Now those will need some browns. I'm gonna get some blue liner back out onto the palette here. I think I'd use just about all of it up. There's a little bit, don't need too much. It's a little bit difficult to grab this thing without, there's just that big old tire assembly on the back of that. Alright, we're going to just fill this in now. And as I said many times, no guts, no glory. I mean, what's the big deal? At this point, you can just paint over something that you don't like. So, no need to be timid, especially in these early stages, which is funny because I see an awful lot of people in the early stages being really timid. It's like they're just horrified that miniature's gonna get up and just punch them in the face. It's better to be the puncher than the punchy, that's for sure. And that is what we're doing here. We're just punching away at this thing. Taking control over it. Sometimes I need to get a little more liquid in there to make a paint flow. You do that. Then you can take some of this away. Like so. Now let's get ourselves these bits of metal here on the side. At least that's how we've been treating those thus far. I think this is the third vehicle that basically has this type of chassis. It could be a fourth. Yeah, I'm just going to hit that right there. Sometimes you see an area maybe that you missed early on. Once again, the blue and the brown mixed together. Do ourselves some glazing here. And it doesn't take, you can see it does not have to take a long time to just get the general gist of things established here. So I'm going to go a little more towards a darker tone here. That may be metal, maybe it's not, maybe it's something else. You know what, I'm just going to throw some notations for dark there. Let's see if we can't find ourselves something that is... Here, we're going to throw some of the Fire Slayer flash into one of our little bins here. It is really handy for a couple of things. As I said, the insurance policy, that whole thing, if you're going to knock it over, no need to worry then if you knock it over. But it goes a little past that as we take some of the blue liner mix to take that off of the straight up reddish brown. Just graze that down a little bit. Now you're less likely to put too much out on the palette. It's a little bit of color control there. So to me, that's all kinds of win right there when you do. Just think of it in that way. So that is a little bit more of the contrast paint because there's sort of a wooden chest sitting there. I'm going to go maybe even a little bit more on these straps right here. Yeah, it doesn't have to be perfect. That's not what we're looking for right now. And I believe that gets some color everywhere. Let's throw some other stuff out here. We're gonna throw a little bit of the, oh, what the heck, let's use the faded ultramarine. We'll mix it in with our Fire Slayer. And I'm just gonna make a few little notes here. Things that are maybe supposed to be somewhat different. Plus there's that wire there. I think I did those in green last time. Anything else I want to mess with this? Here, let's take some faded ultramarine here. Let's throw it in this area, see what we get. And like you see, it's in some ways it harmonizes with that purple there. Like that. And I'm not really worried about that line right there because, well, we're still doing our rust and dust and everything else. Plenty of ways to enhance that. Now we're going to take our, and we'll do more of this in the next segment here because this really is, it's just about the initial layers here, the initial glazing, shade base coat. I think you can see what's starting to happen is in places where it's dry, you start to add a little more in the way of midtones. These tires, I'm really not going to worry about them too much because they're just going to get whacked an awful lot during this process. So they're probably going to get just saved to the end. I don't care if things blend together a little bit at this point. That's the blessing of having all of the weathering and that sort of stuff that in your favor. Because now you don't have to worry about, well, something that kind of moved or shifted or bled into another thing. Whatever. What's the big deal? There's something else at work here, and hopefully some people have kind of, well, I don't know how easy it is to see because of the glare of the wet paint. But there's actually now these grays have some purple in them because I really haven't washed the brush, have I? I've been making this mix and pretty much using stuff that's on the palette, and just the faded purple or faded ultramarine by itself has some purple in it. So now there's a little bit of unifying color here. Remember, if a color goes somewhere, it must go everywhere. Everyone repeat that particular parable several times. Just gonna go through, and some of these metals are just a very quick little, essentially barely noticeable purple shift to some of that. And why is that happening? Again, we've got that faded ultramarine in there. So that really should help us along the way to getting a little bit of that purple into our metals here. So as we make some of these, we did the initial glaze in there. Now that that's dry, we work around it. We leave some of it behind. Here's almost a little bit of wet in the wet. But as always, we have to keep in mind that things like the Pro Acryls, especially those lighter colors, they really cover. They really do. So definitely something to keep in mind. You can see we're gonna go in here. We'll get some lights on this metal plate here. Now, I've been treating this as an entire I'm sorry, metal plate over the hatchback instead of just some metal bars over a window, and I'm just going to stay with that. Like I said, if this was mine and I had the freedom to mess around with it and just explore, I'd be tempted maybe to get in here and do this as a window underneath this metal bracing or whatever. And it could be fun because then you could do some dust effects on the window, where it's kind of where somebody's tried to maybe wipe off some of the mud or whatever. The one thing I was disappointed, there were really no windshields at all on these guys. And that would have been fun to essentially start out with maybe a gloss medium of some kind, something like an art coat. You put it on the window to give it more of a glass type of a feel, and then you go over the top of that with your dust. And you could even have sort of a windshield wiper thing where the dust has been wiped away by the windshield wiper. The historical guys, you see them doing that more and more. So I think something like that. Well, I've got plenty more historical vehicles to do, and if I get a chance to do it on one, that'll give you a chance to check that out. So we'll just get some of the metal there, and it starts to have a little bit of a ever so slight tint of purple to it. Like you do here. Let's get a little bit of a lighter over the grating right there. I'm going to see if I can't get in there with more of a sky blue color. That's down on the windows there. Probably throw some mint green out on the palette or a color along those lines and use that. And this starts to develop pretty quick here. This again, that faded ultramarine, I was just using this for some metals on swords and everything, and on armor. I know you've seen some of this on some of the Song of Ice and Fire miniatures. I know the Baratheons featured a lot of this. So we'll finish up with our blue here, the faded ultramarine. We need some here. And where there's still some of the older stuff left behind, well, hey, that's just fine too. Let's go around to the other side and let's see. Now I don't want to do too much. Yeah, it could be almost a bit too much. I'm gonna grab a little touch of brown liner to knock that down and make it not just darker, but almost a little bit more of a ground type of color. And just trying to get this area to be a little bit lighter. So I want to do the highlights along those edges. You get a nice little bit of sharp contrast there. That's what the metals are all about. You gotta just have that sharper contrast in there. It can't be dull. If you do that, well, then it's gonna look more like just a flatter surface. It's gonna look more like cloth that's highlighted as opposed, or leather maybe, but just not so much like metal. And I'm sure as I get into maybe some more of the 75mm stuff, there'll be more opportunities for things like leather, where maybe it's shinier or has a little bit of looks a little more aged or worn. I think that would be interesting for you guys to see. Now maybe one last go around here on the bottom there of that to make that a touch lighter. Again, I'll take some of that brown liner. We're going to do the same thing on these panels. I'm also going to hit these guys. And there'll be so much dust and rust on these. Remember on the other ones, we barely even hit those because they were just going to be so extremely weathered. We got to do these plates too. You can see how I'm treating the brush more like a filbert. See how it's expanding out, and I'm doing that sort of a side swipe stroke there. Look at that. It's making it even bigger because look at that. See, I'm just basically using the side of it there, and actually doing a little bit of scumbling. This is nice. I get some of the wash from the other side. And we are now going to find ourselves a little light over here. Actually, by sort of varying the cross-hatching on this, might make it look like some kind of rolled steel or whatever. Here, let's find ourselves a little bit of lighter stuff going on there. So we'll say that's pretty good for our first go round here. I'm going to put just something that it can be used as a sky blue. It could be anything. It could be some of the Achillean green contrast paint. What the heck? I'll just throw that out there. We'll play with that in our next phase. So what we'll do is we'll develop these metals even more, and then we're going to see what we want to do with this purple here. Do we want to get that any lighter, or do we want to go darker with it? So we'll check that out next. Let's dive back in with some lighter tones. Now I put a couple of things. There's the Achillean green, that is the contrast paint in there. I also threw out some of the verdigris pale green. I'm going to try that on some of the metals, because remember how we always talked about purple and green together make a gray? Well, what better way to see that straightforward than to have, purple and green together and put them on the figure. Now, I'm just going to get a touch of the brown in there to make sure it stays grayed down enough. Let's see what we can do on our glass here. Let's do this. And what we'll do is over the top of that, then we can put some, as I take some of there it is. See some of that darker brownish blue, so now it's a little less of the pure blue there. Let's have more of a window here. But when the dust goes over the top of that, you don't see too much of the actual window anymore. We'll do that here. Ever so slightly. We'll give it a touch of almost a little bit of a sky color. I think as it moves up, maybe we'll do that. I think this is about the last piece of window that I can really see. Good enough. I'm going to grab a touch of purple in here, and this is where some of my side pieces. They're again trying to reflect a little bit of the purple in that. Let's go. We're going to go into our pale green verdigris. into the Achillean green, because we want this green to be in other places, not just on the metals. Let's put some of that into our windows. Now, the other thing I have to ponder at this point is how light do I make this glass? It seems like in the Mad Max world, all of it was tinted glass. It was all dark. Well, I guess even that could have some sort of reflection on it. Yeah, this is where it becomes more of a up to the person sort of a thing. So this might be the lightest one. I could throw some white out here or something along those lines, but I'm just going to stick with this. I know it seems odd, but I sort of like the difference that yields. See how you can see a little bit of light to dark shading that goes that way. And now you can see a little bit of the same sort of light to dark on that. Okay, we are going to take the pale green verdigris. We'll mix it with the faded ultramarine, and that, it's essentially, it sounds weird, but it's a bit like taking red and green and mixing them together. What do you get? You get sort of a brown. Only here we've got some other lighter colors in there, and it kind of goes from a brown to something more of a, it's more of a light greenish gray. And the idea is I just wanted the metals here to be different than what I did on the other two that are so much like this, where that was more of the classic blue liner that was lightened. So it's more of that standard very blue-gray. Trying to make a little different gray color here. Alright, let's get this little back part on the window here. And I still also, I'm going to have to put some lighter colors out here. Remember, we have to do the tail lights, and we'll do the same thing like we did in the other two videos. We will take that pearl white, and we'll basically create those little, well, what would you call them? Those little segments that are in the, well, it's pretty much plastic these days, it's not really glass. Those little segments and bits that are designed to bounce that light around a little bit more. So that's the function of the pearl white. Now I'm going to get some more of a bit more of the green in there. Just to, there. So you can see how much, there's a little bit less purple to this now. So this way we get some difference between the original stuff, but I can always draw on, there's some of that brown liner, and look, see how it starts to transition into that other gray? It's a little less noticeable that it's green. It is the advantage of, I don't want to say working with a dirty brush, but I guess in some ways we are, because the color that you're using now mixes with the color from the palette, and you'd almost thought we wet blended that, but we didn't. There was no wet blending there. I suppose, and I'm pretty sure I've said this before, you know how I always say don't rely on one color too much, because, well, they could go away. Now, okay, it's not like a technique is going to go away, but if you just keep using that same technique over and over and over again, you'll find yourself getting a little bored, for sure. You'll get a little bit bored with it, and it'll kind of show up in the painting too. It'll look like you're bored. Like you just say, you know what? Doing this, oh look, again, same thing over, doing the same technique for leather. So that's the thing about a routine. You know, you get comfortable with it. That's the advantage. The downside of a routine is you get comfortable with it, starts to get stale. So for me, the colors that I use for metals and everything, it migrates. I mean, it's like birds finding their winter home or something like that. It changes all the time, constantly shifting around. Again, it keeps things way more fresh. You can see now this, you say, wait a minute, that's just, what's with the green there? Well, it's not really going to be green because we still have to put lighter colors over the top of this. And we still have to go with our dust and rust. But just by virtue of this, having the green in there, it's also going to pop out from the purple. Speaking of which, I might, I'm just going to do a few more things on our hubcap. So that metal almost looks virtually green. You say, well, that's just nuts. Well, think of what happens when all the different rust colors hit it. The old rust, that very dark reddish rust. Remember, we're going back to our opposites again. So now we're going to clash some red and green off each other. It's a stealthy way to get that little extra bit of secret contrast that people just don't really notice. It's not the noticeable thing, because you do some stuff and people they see it from a million miles away, which is great. That's fine, nothing wrong with that. But sometimes you need to do the subtle things too. Especially after that one time I was asked a question about, someone said, well, from far away the miniatures look fine, nothing wrong with them, but as you just get closer, they don't really look like much. And I said, well, I'm guessing that your shadow areas have been very efficiently shaded darker with whatever, just kind of a blah color. If it's a red robe, your darks are dark red. And where there's light red, that's your lights. And he said, well, yeah, that's there you go. That's your problem, because you've got too much. It's all just red. There's nothing different in there. If you had some purple or even some kind of blue in those recesses, actually you're going to get more contrast. You're going to sink down even further because you got a cool blue, probably next to a warmer red highlight. But then just from that visual standpoint, you give them more to look at. And you have to always, you got to keep them entertained. If you don't, they'll just get bored with it and move on. And this is what I mean about, we start to add lighter stuff here and it starts to look a little less green. See, I just took a little bit of the brown liner in it. Look at this, using some nice sideways strokes here. So that's a little bit of brown and green together. We're going to find ourselves some lights right here on the windows, like that. Yeah. Let's go right along here. I'm going to go back to the rear window over here. You can see we got that filbert brush working. There's just something about that. Is it going to be ideal in every single situation? No, not in every single situation, but often enough. See how we're scumbling this. We're even almost like there's some dents in there, some kind of abrasions or whatever, and it's just a light middle tone. Pretty much just a light middle tone at this stage. Now, what I want to see is what do I do with that purple there? Because something tells I just don't want to. There's almost a little bit of, there's a little modeling in there, which is not horrible. Actually, I kind of like that. But I'm just going to mix some light colors with that purple and just see what we get. Because I also thought, too, if I get some of that dark purple in there that has some of that bluish effect, it might actually give us a bit of a, I know they call them, we always call them interference colors. And that's where you have, yeah, that's purple, but it's two different types of purple together, all in the same spot. So again, here, we're just keeping this real simple. Very simple. Because as I've learned with the other vehicles, once that rust and dust hits it, that just, you can't see any of that. And again, there's going to be an awful lot of dust and rust on those bolts there, so we are not going to go crazy worrying about those. One thing I will do while I'm here and while I've got this is we will hit this with some of the white, just to, because as we go over it with, we'll go over it with some of the yellow. And look at, I mean, look how this, the Pro-Acryl stuff covers. That's, well, that's titanium white for you. That is titanium white. Now, we won't be mixing this with the purple. We're going to be mixing the, we'll be taking that faded ultramarine and we'll mix that with the purple. Alright, one other of these. Not even sure you can really see that. But that is all I needed to do. Get this guy, and I'm just going to get myself a few. Yeah, before I get too crazy with that, let's go back to our green here. Let's tone that down. Let's go touch brighter. Some of that. And also right along there. Sort of makes that point seem a little bit more raised. Our same white and pale green verdigris along this bit of the metal here. Let's do that later. And just find myself a few highlights along here. Definitely along these edges. We'll not focus too much on those. I think we got the other side. Last, I'll hit these two because we want to make those some kind of glowing things also. Maybe I'll break out the fluorescent paint for those. Just a couple of those. And now into the, do some of this purple stuff here. This is the last thing we'll tackle in this particular segment. So there's just a touch of that faded ultramarine in there, and boy does that already changes it so much. But this will probably be dark. When this hits this, I'm guessing, not as dark as I thought. Not as dark as I thought. I'm going to get rid of some of that. And know I mentioned this before. I think it was in the, not necessarily the dark story. Actually, it was the other vehicle painting tutorial that at this point now, this is going to behave more like, say, the Reaper Clears will. Where it is sort of semi-translucent. Just going to drag this right over the top there. Now, I'm going to hit that in here too, because some of the washes from that sleeping bag thing, or whatever stowage was on there. Gonna take some more of the faded ultramarine. We'll mix that in there. We'll see what we get. Where are we at here? So that does change up that color a bit. It's not a huge change or whatever, but you're going to see less of the warmth of it because you don't have the transparency. You don't have the white showing through. We'll do this along right there along that wheel well. And I'm pretty sure, as I said, in the one with the dark blue, where we were doing something like this with the translucent blue, or the blue transparent Pro Acrylic paint. Well, it's gonna start to get a little more opaque. Because as you add more of the Pro Acrylic, you're going to get less and less of the transparent effect, which is okay because, well, you're looking for a highlight anyway, and it's fine if it's more opaque where you want your lightest colors to be. You want that sort of coverage. So here we will, this is why I really didn't fret doing the, going right into that little crevice there. Not a big deal. Let's throw in a little more. You can see how we're making a little bit of a stair step here. Heck, it's even more convenient when you're doing it with a wet palette because, well, it's just going to stay wet. You're not going to lose that. And see over this, that really is, it's an interesting color of purple there. Now, like I said, it's going to be a bit on the, I don't want to say the pinkish side. Maybe I'm more on the magenta side of things. The lighter this gets. And if it does get too magenta, though, that's where I can take the dark purple, start to mix that in there. Or I could use, well, if I throw in any of that greenish color that we were using to highlight the metals, then, well, it's going to start to turn gray, because remember the whole green and purple make gray thing. I'm going to go right up over the top of this. Now you can see that nice bright purple there. We've got our side mirrors here. I'm going to work in some of the lighter purple here. Let's get some on that spoiler. Back here on the ever so slightly there. Because the lighter this gets, the warmer it gets. It starts to become more magenta. More pink, less purple. I can even use my finger in some places to wipe stuff away. There. Let's hit this part of the wheel well. That right there, I'm just not going to fret that because there's so many other odds and ends right there that it's a good excuse to just have lots of weathering or chipping or something like that because you have tools and stowage sitting there. It's not exactly showroom floor kind of stuff. Just something to think about. This may be one of the last editions of the faded ultramarine here. Now you can see there's a little bit of a texture difference, almost like there's a bit of shininess, and because this stuff dries so ultra matte by comparison. But a little bit of the, was it the Army Painter anti-shine that equalized it, because we had the same thing with the blue vehicle 2, and that just, like I said, that equalized it no problem. Didn't see that slight difference anymore. It's magnified because of all the lights that are pointed down at this such close proximity. Yeah, I really think, I don't know if I want to go any lighter than this, and that even though we're using basically a sort of a bluish, I mean, it almost looks like a grayish blue purple or something, it's still, because of the intensity of the transparent purple, it's still getting to be kind of a magenta. It's just interesting. It's kind of an observation more than anything else. Yeah, not like it's anything horrible or whatever. I need to get this one more time back here. And anywhere, I just say, you know what, that's not really a really fantastic blend there. That's where there's all kinds of, there's going to be lots of weathering and chipping right there. It's a fantastic place to put some damage. Yeah, welcome to the wonder of painting vehicles, especially vehicles that have some weathering. Yeah, I will go one more round in just a couple of spots here. Keep it as minimal as possible. Yeah, we'll go up here. I'm gonna actually back off here, get some more of the transparent purple back in there. And we're just gonna get a little differentiation on these panels. Like so. Even, I don't want to say a highlight or whatever, just a little bit of an edge on that. Because remember, there will be, we definitely want to have some kind of chipping or whatever along this leading edge. It's almost like that's what leading edges are for. Just to collect chips. Now, last thing I will play with here. This is some of the That's the dark purple because it's got a little bit of blue in it. And now I'll sort of go back in the other way here. I don't want to say I'm putting in some darks, but I put some of that in here. And just for the heck of it, I am going to play with some of the faded ultramarine into this. And now, you can see I've got it's a somewhat lighter purple, but I don't even know if it really shows up on camera. But this most definitely has a little more blue in it. No doubt about it, there's more blue to this. So now it takes away some of the magenta in places. I want to do it everywhere. But in some spots, like I said, it makes it more of the... almost more like an interference paint. You just have to, I guess, look that up and see what that's all about. If you're not quite familiar with the idea. So we will call that, let's say that's basically ready to go. As like I said, there's plenty of, and it's nowhere near, yeah, look at that, it's nowhere near as intense. When you see that stuff dry, nowhere near as intense as the magenta type stuff up here on the top of the vehicle. So that's good. Wanted to have this, well, you know, this is sort of facing where the ground is. It's going to have even more of the rust and dust on it. So that does exactly what I was hoping. So I think what we'll do now is we'll hit these guys here, and we'll start doing the overall rust and chipping effects, and then the last thing will be the weathering powders. I think we'll also do the headlights too. So we got a whole bunch to do in this next segment. We'll be right back with that. We're going to get back into this vehicle here with a few, I'll go with a few details here real quick. Just some of these little odds and ends here, the different cables and such. So actually, first thing I'm going to do is get the pearl white here. See a little bit of that over here. And let's get that on the headlights over here. Hopefully where you can see it. Really, it doesn't show up much on camera. But when we put the gloss stuff over the top of it, it tends to bring that out just a little bit. I'm just gonna cover that up with some purple there. Just can't get a brush down. Well, at least not on camera. I can't get a brush down in there. There we go. Let's see, where else are we gonna do some of that? Over here. I'm gonna mix it in with the yellow, actually. Where are we at? Because we take the... oh, is that the... not Flesh Tears red, it's the Blood Angels red. We take that... yeah, I almost called it a ghost tint. Actually, a ghost tint, one of the Badger ghost tints could actually work for something like that. So we got those in place. I'm also going to throw that here and here. Can't really see. It's sort of blocked. Like so. And there's one more over there. And then... oh, I'll just do it right over here. Again, I know you can't really see that too much. Have to let those, sorry, dry for a little bit here. So I'm going to take some of this green. Yeah, I think that is in the camera screen. Throw this over the top here. The other one, I'm thinking, yeah, I might do that red. And actually, for the heck of it, I might actually do, I don't know, the other ones I think I did yellow on this, so I'm just trying to make things a little bit different. Just going a little different here with my green on the ends of whatever the heck these things are. Some kind of canisters or something, I have no idea. And I'm gonna do a little bit of glowing green here. I could use I've got the scale 75 fluorescence I can throw on there too to make that a little brighter at the same time. But while I've got it, that's my red. I'm sorry about that. Just gonna make sort of a red axe handle here, why not? Good enough. And we'll take a little bit of our ultramarine, or light ultramarine blue. Let's make some sort of a gray here, and just, I didn't want that to be a leather strap over a brown handle. There we got a couple of bolts there. Now more red here. Just by mixing a little bit of the opaque pro acryl really changes that around. If you want it to be even more intense, you do something like a clear red, I suppose, would work in there. These little splashes of color like this makes all that gray, just it breaks it up a little bit. Then we add the rust and dust, breaks it up a little bit more. Let's go back to some green over here. And it looks like there's another one of these wires over here, so I'll just hit that real quick. Not really going to treat this as exhaust because, well, we got all these wires coming out of it, so I don't really know exactly what it was that they were trying to do with some of this stuff. Just can only speculate. But yeah, I think that other stuff is dry, so we can get to that in a moment here. Some type of just generating extra electricity for whatever reason. Not quite sure what that's all about. Here, I'm just going to get a little bit of some warmer gray onto these wheels here before we hit them with all of our dust and everything else. I'm going to see if I can get this red together with some of my other browns and do something with these straps here. I mean, they don't have to be leather color. They could be something else. They could be, I don't know, like blue and yellow, some kind of vinyl straps instead, but I think with everything else, this is probably the best idea for the color of that. Here, let's just throw some of that here as well. I don't want it to be too similar to the rust color, so I've got to almost make it, sorry, a little more pink. Sorry. It's been a long couple of days of talking, and I guess this is just going to be the month of allergies. Didn't used to be But then it didn't used to rain this much in September. Plus, it's only been basically 3 weeks since we got back from ReaperCon. It seems like it's been longer, but it really hasn't. And I'm gonna add a little more, sorry, just a bit more white to this. But so it doesn't get too pink, I will go back to some other things, some yellow, some of the red, maybe even some of this gray here. And in no time at all, the straps there look a little bit less like just some kind of dingy gray whatever. Like that. I really don't know. At first I thought, okay, the straps are there to hold the door in place, but then they're sort of tucked inside the door, so I wasn't sure. Like I said, I have no idea what anything is, what it's supposed to really be. That is sometimes, well, not sometimes, it can really be just a disadvantage when you are trying to do commission stuff that you're just not familiar with. It's difficult no matter what. You're doing your own armies, and like the Warcry stuff, I'm busy trying to figure out what the heck is supposed to be what on those figures. That's why that's why I like my bolt action stuff, because things are just things. They're not trying to be, a gun is a gun. It's real obvious what it is. Pouch is a pouch. Ammo is ammo. It's a lot easier to figure out. Whereas sometimes the sci-fi and fantasy things, it looks a little bit like what you know. It looks vaguely familiar to something, but then that's really all it's supposed to be, is just vaguely familiar to something. It's not really supposed to be something. Or it's a pretend thing. Doesn't make that any easier, but now you can see we've got a little more shape here, and these guys actually going. You can see I'm using some green in here. That's the secret weapon. Pale green verdigris. It's not to turn it green, it's almost to make it a little more gray, a little less. Take it off of the almost flesh tone colored, although there's some actually decent flesh tones in what I'm working with here. And I think you've seen me use the verdigris pale green on skin tone. Yeah, the Warcry stuff, there's a lot of, oh my gosh, what in the world is this going on there? So as I start to do some of those tutorials, if I'm pondering to myself, what the heck is that? Just because I'm wondering, I just have no idea what it is. Now we're going the other way. This has a little bit more pink in it, a little bit texture too. Then some final touches on straps here. Because with the dust that we're going to add and everything else, I found that out, I think one of the first ones. And this almost goes back to the army painting stuff. I really shaded those up nice, did all kinds of stuff, did some greens and the mid-tones and everything else, and then I hit it with basically the weathering stuff, and I said, wow, didn't really need to spend all that time doing that other stuff now, did I? Definitely adds a little more color to that. Okay, let us go over the tail lights. This is the contrast paint right over the top, and we will, ironically enough, I'm trying to actually get some of the variations in that, the little watermarks. See, we're doing some dots of it there. So I'm just going to go straight over it and then come back in here for some more, basically making little globs of it here. Gives it a bright look. Headlights, that's going to be afterwards. Now we do need some dark here, so we'll add that in. And I know this is all about rust and everything else, but we need to add this stuff in before we get to that. So I think we're pretty well set when it comes to that. Yeah, let's grab our rust here. So I'm gonna have some old rust. That's just gonna go here for now. And we've got, is this the red rust? Yeah. And hopefully that actually, oh, it actually comes out of there. What do you know? And then this is some of the yellow rust, no, orange rust. That's gonna go up here. And that one is stopped up. So we'll use one of these guys here. One of those triangle-shaped push pins. I also have the Fire Slayer flesh over here. If you remember, we mixed that in. So we're going to mix that in with some of the old rust. Let's get started over here. Like so. Let's say we make that a little more liquid. And we just work in smaller areas here. Just like we did before, we take it out of the brush, and now we're going to push this stuff around. Push that around, go back into our water again. We move it around. Maybe try a little streak right here across the gravity going on. And now, as that starts to dry, we're gonna go in with our lighter rust color. This is the red rust. Here, let's get a few, almost a little bit of spots of it there. Because rust can do that. It's weird. I've seen it, especially when I see construction vehicles or dump trucks, whatever. It's just an interesting what the processes are at work that causes that to happen. It's interacting with some paint or whatever that's trapped water in underneath it, and it's kind of bubbling to the surface. But that will give us now a nice little start to our rust. We'll proceed here like so. See how that it just gets down into those crevices really nice. We can get some more. Here you have to figure on the roof or whatever, you could probably see a fair amount of that collecting there. Just using my finger to wipe some of it away. Back into that the red rust. And as I said, don't be afraid to wipe some of that away with your hands. You could use the different makeup sponges. You've seen me use those. So again, another little watercolor type thing right here as we take advantage of some of the wet paint. And we just let those different rust colors do their thing. Sometimes you have to let it do its own thing, and we've talked about that several times. Also, just you have to be patient, let whatever the rust is going to do, just let it do. See here we can see, look at this. We can go filbert style, and then we got some rust streaks here. And do that here. Now let's take some of that away, blend it out a little bit, and then go in. And you notice this is a little more opaque as I add in things like the red rust and now the orange rust. And as always, too much of something can be too much of something. You know, here, well, it's a fantasy thing. You know, it's not, we're not doing a historical vehicle, so I think we can be forgiven maybe for some exuberance in the way things are rusted. There's not a lot of, this vehicle is not exactly in a natural state anyway, so trying to do completely 100% natural rust effects on it, well, is that really what you want? And now, of course, I know there's folks, obviously Justin, he studies the weathering. It's a science for him. He studies that. He really analyzes it, way more than I do. His reference collection on weathering and such, by comparison, I don't even have a collection. I barely have a folder. So, that's why I do suggest you check out his, well, you could almost call it Weathering Wednesdays, but his workshop Wednesdays, which do involve things that are not just weathering. I think you could get something out of those. Now, the fun thing about having the darker areas over here, this is what I was hoping to do. So we got some water in the brush. And, well, gee, there. See how we've just sort of streaked that right down there, and when that all dries, be very nifty. Now we're back to our darker rust color here. Yeah, I need to. There's a lot of bright rust there. Let's cool that down a little bit. The windshield here, maybe I won't do quite so much. This is still working with the red. Gonna get some water into that, and it's just the idea is just thin it down. Same on these. Move it around. And then we'll add a bit of our lighter rust colors in here. That's something like that. You focus maybe around things like rivets and bolts and such things. Let's See, we got some water there already, and the idea is we'll take it now and we'll just draw that right down. Take it and draw it right down. That's what you do with the oils. But with the acrylic stuff, yeah, you have to sort of prep the surface first. That's what's neat about the oils, is they sort of function like that. Just there's always more than one way to do something, more than one material that can be used. Sometimes they might require some different approaches to each other. Maybe I'll just get a little bit of darker rust in there. And remember, this stuff, it's designed to be sort of watercolor like this. So I'm going to slam some of that in there. Hopefully you can see that. And I just take some water now. See how we get some nifty rust down inside there. So what's the typical, usually, and I know I do this all the time, those recesses, well, they have to be dark, right? That's how recesses are. They're always dark. Not always. And it actually has so much more interesting when you have an area that's supposed to be dark and it actually is. It actually has some lightness to it. And in the same way what we just did over there. Now let's see if I can't darken down my rust even that much more. Yeah. And once again, we move this around. We take our red rust, work with the liquid that's already here. See how that just pushes itself around? Yeah, there's other, well, see, even I think your clear and liner paints, especially your clear paints, will do that. That's why I love those so much. So we added a little more rust there. Let's do it here. Again, some water. And then see, look at what that does. See how that just sort of goes out like that? And that's just a weird thing that rust does. It sort of just expands out like that. And what better way to replicate some kind of natural process like that, well, than a natural process like that. See how it just sort of suspends itself in there? That is just the coolest. So we'll move that around. I enjoy this. I look forward to getting back into. Well, I've got some more Cruel Sea ships to do, but there's definitely, I need to get back into my bolt action stuff for a variety of reasons. I gotta make some more battle reports, and since not everything can all be France 1940, I've got to get back into those and start making, oh, heaven forbid, late war figures, or at least mid-war, or at least another area. I actually want to do some desert theme stuff because, yeah, here we go. More here. Get this lighter. I thought the bases might be fun. I thought the terrain could certainly be fun. The terrain projects. And believe it or not, as long as, say, something like the entrenched positions are modular, which, and I want to focus on modular terrain pieces, because as much as we all love, set in terrain pieces into a board, they look fantastic. They're just not necessarily practical. But I could, in theory, have my Harad, which that is a basing, well, not bad, it's a army painting series that's going to be starting up here. doing some desert themed bases. Basically sand, horses kicking up sand. We may use a little bit also of the, what is that, the crackle paint there? Because I tested that out on some, well, modern era, I guess if you want to call it, World War II bases, and that worked well. So I want to try it on the Lord of the Rings desert bases, see how that works. We're just adding in. See, I want to go too light with this. See, we'll just add one little light streak into that. Let's get this all here. Don't be afraid to just wipe some of that away. Let's get ourselves a little more of the red rust around the bolts here. Then we get some water into this, and let's do this kind of a brush stroke here. Maybe take some of the water out of it. And then we'll do some of these little streaks here. Now let's go back into our orange here. As you do. That's the, again, the orange rust. And with each of these, there's a little less of the, well, here it's pretty much just straight up orange rust. Now let's, yeah, see this little streak right down from that bolt there. See if we can't tack on a little bit of yellow rust to that orange rust. And last but not least, let's see if we can do some chipping with one of our sponges here. Now I want to get me some of the brown liner out here. That's blue, that's not brown. Here it is. And let's go right along that leading edge as we've done before. Alright, so along the wheel wells, definitely another place for it. Who knows, maybe even along the roof line there. That could explain some of that rust over there. Now, obviously, you know, this is really not metal. That's why I haven't really done any rust back here. It's some sort of vinyl, of course, but like I said, sometimes you fudge things a little bit here and there. Alright, I think that takes care of that pretty well. Don't want to do too much, and now you know why I didn't get too hung up on precision all over here. I'm going to take a little bit of that and do some other, there, move that around. I want to get some darker things in here too. We have a lot of the lighter rust and everything else, but maybe some darker stuff would be fun too to have. Now our window sort of stands out as well. Alright, what we'll do now, we'll let this dry, and once this dries, then we can get into those weathering powders. And of course, put the gloss effects in some of the places like our tail lights and headlights and such things. So we'll be right back with some powders. We're back and we're looking to do our weathering powders here. Now, I think you can see, got these arrayed out on the palette here. We've got a dark earth. I think that's one over here in the corner there. I think this is the green earth. We've got ancient earth. I think this is the lightest one here. And this one's different. We haven't actually used this one. It's clay brown. Now I had done, so we're still waiting on some of these washes underneath here to dry. You can see we gave it a little bit more of a rust type of effect there. Here, I'm gonna see if I can get the light to point down in there, and we'll go up with the lightness a bit. Now we're going to go with the powdery stuff first. And we're going to start off with this. It's more of a straight up brown. And you can see how that it complements everything else that's there. That's just a really fantastic color. We're also going to do some here by our windshield. Let's certainly have that accumulate over here on the stowage. Back here on the spoiler. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to switch my lights here. So just bear with me for a second. So we're going to do this, and we're going to do that. Basically, that eliminates some of the... Makes it really tough for me, but hopefully for you, gives you a little better vision of this. For whatever reason, and LED lights should not do that, but you get those gray bars of death, and happens to be just right in the middle of the vehicle. You can't see what's going on. So I just decided to get rid of that. So I always have that secondary lighting system in hand. If I wanted to do some kind of a soot thing here, I could have obviously the black weathering powder. Now this is where it's really fun, right there. But I don't want to do too much because it'll blow away all of the rust effects. But, well, where would the dust accumulate? Certainly in these areas. So I'm really trying to push that down in there. Now, like I said, if I could also use pigment fixer on this. However, the pigment fixer, that means you have to paint it on, and you'll see, hopefully that the other stuff dries, you'll get a notion then of how this gets altered when it's turned into liquid. Most of you have seen me do that before. So here we're going to put some more, again, some dust over here. Now you might want to, for yourself, I don't know if you can see a little cloud kind of fly up there. It's just like any kind of pastel dust. You might want to just wear a mask, and by mask I mean one of those cheap surgical masks. You don't need, it's the sort of mask that I wear when I airbrush. You don't really need something like that, because these, you're just not around them that much. You're not doing this for well, when you're me and you're airbrushing, you're priming stuff for hours potentially, and it's going all over the place. So that is why I have not only the airbrush fan mechanism going on, but certainly I have the mask on. So we'll weather up the tires here, get some dust on those. Yeah, as I wait for the other stuff to dry, and remember we have multiple colors here. You can mix them together, but for right now, as you can see, we're gonna stick with, yeah, see that darker. Here, let's mix a little bit of the lighter dust with it. See how the, right on that panel there, That's why I like to have the lighter dust. That's why I like to mix these together, and it's why it's neat to have a darker color like this, because the lighter you go with the powders like that, the more it's going to show up. Let's certainly get ourselves plenty of dust in here. I will just be using the Tester's dull coat. Here, let's get some. It's almost more of a rust type color. Just a spray. Now I do have my airbrush spray booth, so I can spray that stuff indoors. I don't have to worry about it clouding up or whatever. And the airbrush spray booth they're really not expensive. When you're in the grand scheme of things, it's something, basically the full entire thing with extra filters and all that. It's $90 on Amazon. To me, that is just well worth it. It lasts a really long time. Mine lasted for years, and I used it for hours on end. Yours will certainly last much longer, because you will not be using it as vigorously as I did. Alright, so that's still drying a little bit, but I think we're in an okay position at this point. Let's get in here with some of the rust. So we're going underneath here. This is rubbing alcohol in this container over here. See where my brush is pointing to it. And I'm going to grab some of the rust, and look what that does. See how it turns it into a liquid? But be mindful. See how it turns darker here? It's not going to stay that way. It's going to be lighter. It will dry its natural color. Alright. It's going to go in here, and it's going to not really look like anything. It's like just a bunch of liquid. I could also, instead of using the rubbing alcohol, I could use Pigment Fixer here, since we're using basically a liquid to brush this on. I could do that. And it would lock it in place, no doubt. I almost grabbed water. That would not have been too helpful. So what can happen is it'll get wiped away. So I'm trying to get some of the rust down in here, and again, I almost reached for water. I guess that's the other thing I would probably do, is just get all water containers away from the area, because then it'll remove the temptation to reach for the said water. Now, I'm not really worried about what happens with that, because I'm going to go back in there with some other. Yeah, I can already see that starting to dry there. Wow. That's the thing about rubbing alcohol, is its evaporation point is massively lower. It just dries in no time. It's not like water. Not at all like water. It's really not subject to humidity like water is, obviously. So that's it. Boy, look at how that's already so dry and so much lighter. Might even throw a touch of that clay brown in there. And then as this dries, now let's say we don't like where it is in a certain location. I can take, this is just straight up rubbing alcohol here. And I can actually just wipe it away. Let's see here, I don't really like that. Can wipe some of that away. Over here, let's say that's a little bit rough. I'm just going to take some rubbing alcohol and smooth that away. Look at how fast that's drying there. Now, I'm going to mix some of this with the clay brown. This is really going to make it much lighter, so we have to be aware of that. And I'm only going to do it in a few spots. And if I do a brushing action with it, it's going to wipe away previous colors. So this is why we're just sort of doing it in little dots like this. And much like oils, we're going to let the capillary action do its thing. Might even just throw a few dots of it right there. And remember, once all this dries here, then I can go in with the other weathering powders and do more of the dry treatment like we did on the tires and such. So I'm going to find myself one of these that doesn't have liquid in it. And I'm going to do something like this. There is one other little trick, and we might do this on the big old bus, but you'll certainly be seeing it. I've got so many bolt action vehicles to paint. Some are from trench work, some of them from Warlord. But what you'll see me do is actually take, look at that. So I just let that splash onto there, is take the, it's just, well, I wish I had a third hand, but then I would be Zinch. And I'm just gonna, there we go. See what I'm just doing? Just flicking some of this stuff on there into the wet. Well, I could take the pigment fixer, sort of like what we do with the rust. Look at that. See how that's just sitting on there now instead of brushed on? So that is something you could do. That was pigment fixer right there. Then that's something I wish I could experiment with right now. But I'll do that with the tanks. Now see here we've got that clay brown. See how much lighter that got there? And that's how we're going to go over it now with some of the other stuff here. It just sort of makes that fade to the backdrop. Here, let's get some of this is that mix of various powders together. I think we need some over here too. Somehow we avoided that area entirely. We don't want to do that. Yeah, look at that. It's the texture that's in there because this is just so visible. See, we got some darkness in there. We got some of the lighter texture over the top. Here, let's even, I'm gonna mix this in the clay brown to get, look at that. This is something Justin loves. He loves textures because that's why the paints, the weathering paints, one of the things that aside from the way they work as a watercolor type thing, whatever, is they almost have, it's like they have a little texture. Well, here, this is, I mean, that's texture right there. It's actually piled up on there. And what helped was having the liquid as part of that. So see how that's a nice texture right there? That is so fun. When you get it, when it's that exposed like that, why not really give it some nice extra, just some visual, nice little visual bump right there. Yeah, that's pretty nifty. So I really didn't know how this was all going to work out necessarily. But that really worked out well. So we'll see if we can do more things like that. Now you could do that with the oil, the mud, so we could put some oil paint on there, and we could actually then brush some of this stuff into it. We'll try it all. We'll try every single thing and see what we like best or see what's more convenient. Here, let's get some of that away. And now one of the last things I will do, let's see if I have some, yes I do. I have some of this here. And do I have a brush I can use for that? I give this another bit of a shake here. Put this off to the side. And right here onto the headlights. And the second one. Get to the tail lights here. Good to go. Maybe a touch thicker there. So again, lots of nifty differences in the surface, and I'm so tempted to put it on the windshield, but we didn't do it on the other ones. But what I will do is on these guys here. So I think that's all good. Yeah, let's get this closed out of the way. And I don't know, I'm just gonna play with a little bit of some of the rubbing alcohol here, some of this. And almost, see how that's kind of got some thickness to it? Look at this. Here, I'll show you. See that? It's basically almost like a clump of something there. It's like I'm putting little clumps of mud. There's also, Secret Weapon has some mud things that you can do. Again, this probably, if I had Pigment Fixer or something like that, that would be the better thing to use with this. So that is something maybe we'll try. Like I said, on the bus, we'll mess around with some Pigment Fixer just to show you what that looks like. You can also see the difference here. That's some of that red clay there. That's more of that ancient earth or whatever the lighter stuff was. See, here we're going to just do a little bit of side swipe motion on this, push that around. You can see how fast it dries. Look at this. But we're just going to push it around with the rubbing alcohol, even maybe take some of it away. Now if I get that out of the brush completely and do this, see, it's gonna just basically removes that. So there's lots of different ways to mess around with the weathering powders. Plenty of different ways. I'm going to get myself a drier brush here again. And now I'll just push some of this around. Get rid of some of the extras. Because if it's just clumped up there, it is not going to stay in place, even with the spray. So that is fine. And see how it's maintaining its shape there because we're sort of shooting that in there while it was wet. Let's see if I have still some dry powders left. And there you have it. That's another one of our vehicles that's all weatherized and ready to go, Mad Max style, Gasland style, whatever the game is. Yeah, very fun. So thanks again for supporting these. I appreciate it. What I will do eventually is use some weathering powders on bases too. I'm not going to do it, I don't think, on the Necron ones here, but I think on the Harad ones, where I want to get sort of a dusty sand look, I might play with the weathering powders on them too. We haven't really done that on just straight up miniatures yet. So look forward to that. That'll be in, was that series 14 already? Yeah. Army Painting Series 14. How about that? Yeah, if you could drop a like on this video, that's good. It shows YouTube there's engagement, and especially on these unlisted ones that only you guys can see, it really does make a difference actually. So you just added a little more powders over there. So there'll certainly be more On the Workbench episodes coming for you. So thanks again, and I will catch you on the next episode.